Okay, so one of you guys suggested that we do a lesson on plot twist. So here's my basic kind of like top 10 tips on how to do it well and what to avoid. So first thing is that, and I know this seems like a no-brainer, but I'm going to explain what I mean. It needs to make sense slash fit with the previous lore. There are a lot of times where people are just like, oh, but this would be cool. Okay, but does it make sense with what else you have established? I don't care how cool it is, if it makes no sense with what you've established, your readers are going to be lost. For example, if the whole time you've been like, oh yeah, this is a fantasy universe, and then all of a sudden you're just like in New York, everyone's gonna be like, really? Or if you're like, hey, no aliens are here, and then all of a sudden in the middle of your dragon battle, aliens show up, they're all gonna be like, so you got to make sure that if you are going to do something that doesn't seem to make sense with your lore already, that you slowly and gradually introduce it. So this is typically how a lot of people do their plot twists that seem to come out of left field if you don't watch it or read it for yourself. Or if you have the plot explained to you in those 10 steps, you're like, how? But then when you read it, you're like, oh, that checks out. That's because of the fact that people have these things leading up to it, making it so that they're like, okay, what there's this thing and this thing and this thing that makes you think that maybe this might happen, and now it does. Now, the problem is you're probably thinking that's just predictability, not a plot twist. That's the difference between a good plot twist and a bad plot twist. Moving on to my next thing is that it does need to be properly foreshadowed. If it is not properly foreshadowed, then it just doesn't make any sense to your reader, and your reader ends up be feeling kind of betrayed. It's almost like when you throw a surprise party, but it's not their birthday. It's no longer fun. If you do it for a birthday, then everyone's like, oh, I'm shocked, but also happy. Whereas if you're just like, surprise for no reason, then all of a sudden they're like, why? Why are you in my house? Exactly. You want the, oh my gosh, it's my birthday. Now, why are you in my house? That's what we want to avoid by having proper foreshadowing, having things that make sense. And it doesn't have to be harsh foreshadowing. It can be very, very like casual and subtle foreshadowing. But I will say one warning. I would recommend with your plot twist, give three bigger foreshadowing. And when I say bigger, I just mean a little more obvious for those who need a little bit of a thwack on the head. Um, and then you have a couple more subtler, smaller foreshadowings just to help remind the reader that this is a thing. Because if you don't have the subtle foreshadowings, then people forget about the big foreshadowings. And if you don't have the big foreshadowing, then the people who just go like, that was weird and move on completely forget that this is an issue. Um, so you do sometimes need to swack people over the head a little bit. You don't want to spoon feed your reader. You don't want to also be like, ooh, spooky things, wink, wink. You don't want to be too obvious, but at the same time, if you're not obvious enough, you can have people that are just like, what? And not in a positive way. I actually had this happen once where it actually ended up being really great because we went back and fixed the foreshadowing and whatnot. But I actually had a book that was like this that I was working with as an editor, where I was going, this is a good book, this is going well. And then all of a sudden at the end, it was like, boom, plot twist. And I was like, huh? What? It wasn't like, oh my gosh, no. Like, or, oh my gosh, what? It was just straight up like, deer in the headlights stare. And you don't want deer in the headlights stare. You want, like I said, like, mind blown moment. Mind blown moment is when you properly foreshadow. When you don't properly foreshadow, they end up just deer in the headlights and they get run over. Um, they get run over by your plot and they're lost. So, um, with the proper foreshadowing, it can even be something just really small. Like I said, something that seems significant when you reread it, but at the time it doesn't seem very significant. A great example of this in actual series that are like not spoilers, because I would give you the example of the one that I edited because it's a great book, but then I would for you. So instead, I'm going to do a bigger, more prominent series, and this is less of a big spoiler. So, for example, the Lunar Chronicles has the first book, Cinder. It's a great retelling of Cinderella. However, the first time I read it, I didn't catch half of the foreshadowing. And I was just like, oh, this makes sense when they had a plot twist. I was like, mind blown, but also it makes sense for some reason. And then I reread the book for an English assignment, and I went, oh my gosh, that's why it made sense. It's right there. So it was blunt enough foreshadowing that when I reread it, I was like, I see it now. But it was also subtle enough that I was like, that's cool, and I moved on. So she actually introduces every single. This is why I say it's not a big foreshadowing like problem. She introduces every single character that's going to be in the series in that first book. They at least show up or are referenced in that first book, which is crazy to think about because it's a big cast of characters. There's like 12. But she at least mentions them or has them have a brief cameo at least once in that book, sometimes multiple times depending on the character. And so as a result, it makes it so when you run into them, you're just like, oh, cool, that person. For some reason, I feel like they're familiar. And then when you reread it, you're like, that's why they're so that's a great example of good subtle foreshadowing, where it's something that can be easily brushed under the rug, but at the same time, if needed, you can pull it back out from under the rug and go, "This is why it makes sense." So, last thing for doing it well before I move on to how to do it badly / don't do this. You need to make sure that the ending is still well earned. Typically, the best plot twists are complicating the scenario, not fixing it. If they are fixing the scenario, we're going to talk about that later, but that's called Deus Ex Machina. Bad. Generally, these are things where you end up in the B-rated film. You're watching the film, and then all of a sudden they're just like, and aliens arrive and fix the whole problem. And you're like, then why were we here in the first place? What was the point? So, you need to make sure that the ending is well earned. They still have try-fail cycles. The plot twist complicates things. It doesn't fix things. It makes people go, oh no, instead of going like, why? Or if it makes them go, why? Make them go like, why would you do that? Instead of being like, why are there aliens in my fantasy book? Um, so make sure that they are still working towards that ending instead of having it just fully usurp the ending and rewrite the entire thing, basically. Yes, question.
I asked a question, but it is a comment.
Fair enough.
So the sample you said about but it is a video game.
Okay.
Essentially, with the music, it's like all happy and chipper.
Yeah.
But it seems too happy and chipper,
Mhm.
and it slowly introduces the main antagonist. Like, oh, it's a sweet little flower. Oh, this is
Yes,
a
yes. No, it's true. You can do things like that where you foreshadow with movies and TV shows. It's kind of easier because we've talked about this before. But sometimes music can be your own foreshadowing in TV shows. Like we've discussed this before. They can be having the cutest love scene in the world where it's like, I love you forever. But if there's sinister music, you're like, oh. And you want that same vibe with your foreshadowing. You want people to be like, I don't know why, but I get nope. I get nope. I don't want to be here. And the best way you can do this is your word choice, actually. Your word choice actually really helps set the tone. So if you want to have this cute love scene where they should be like, nope, because secretly he's a serial killer, you should use creepy descriptors. You should use creepy descriptors where it's like, instead of like he lovingly touched his hair, it's like he caressed her hair in the same way he did his formaldehyde experiments. And it's like, nope, no, out. It's like that gives you that vibe that makes you go, I don't know what's wrong here, but something is wrong. And you want to make sure that you give them that sense. If you don't give them that sense, then they just feel frustrated and lost. All right, so now we're going to talk about how to do it badly / what not to do it badly. As we discussed previously, make sure that it fits with the previous lore. Some of the problems that you can run into here is that you might have to do um, what's called basically metagaming or meta writing or different things like that, where you have to go back and retcon things and be like, guess what? I know this, but the reason it doesn't make sense is because magic was different before, and we had this whole magical revolution, and we discovered a new kind of magic, so that's why it works now, or different things like that. That can sometimes be okay, but I will say try your best to remember all your own lore, because if you just forget your own lore, that's when you run into problems where people are like, couldn't they have just easily solved it with this spell? And you're just sitting there going, they could have. I wish I would have thought of that. Because we as writers sometimes have moments like that where it's like, oh, exactly, that would have been a smart idea. Whoopsie, I guess. So make sure that you have a lot of beta readers who know you probably even better than you do. Because there are some people who will be that much of a fandom over your stuff. And you want to pass it to them first because then they will be like, dear author, why? And then you'll be like, good question. Let me fix that. So, either have a story Bible or have really religiously studying beta readers and a good editor, but beta readers are bare minimum. All right. Next thing is when the subplot eats the main plot. This is the biggest problem, aside from Deus Ex Machina, and why it causes plot twist issues. is when your plot is 100% about, for example, if your plot is 100% about vampires, and then all of a sudden your plot twist is that secretly the fairies have a treaty. Why? This makes no sense. It's not relevant to the vampire plot. How is this like making any sense? You need to make sure that your plot is relevant and fits all the various story beats when you go back. You don't, and that's okay. But if you are not a plotter, just make sure when you go back that you point out all the story beats, do either the save the cat method or the 3-act structure, whatever floats your boat, and you go through it and make sure it has all those story beats and that they all fit with that original plot. So if plot A is vampires are crazy and plot B is fairies, your plot twist should not be fairy related because that's the subplot. Oftentimes the subplot will come up and eat the main plot, and then it makes no sense. So make sure your subplot stays down and that your main plot stays on the surface. If you want to flip flop or switch that up in the next book, that's fine, but it should be different books, not the same book. Or if you want to have 2 plot twists happen at the same time for your subplot and your main plot, that's also fine. But you just need to make sure that the subplot isn't going to completely overshadow your cool main plot. If it is overshadowing your main plot, you also might want to just consider a rewrite. Consider going back and being like, why was this more compelling? Why is this more interesting? Maybe I should do it from that point of view instead. Because sometimes that's your writer's instinct going, this is more interesting, and you need to listen to that. Your writer's instinct is usually right. Pretty much every time I've worked with people as a professional editor, and I go, here's your problem in the story. Oh, well, I tried to do that the first time and I felt like it was bad, so I didn't do that. And I said, well, your gut was right, so go back, do that again. Um, so, with that being said, though, the last thing is Deus Ex Machina. Now, this is the worst of the worst. This is when the plot twist, like I said, it just fixes everything. It doesn't even, it makes it so that all the work they did was either pointless or that they don't need to do any work. At which point, why did they even bother trying? It loses all that motivation because part of what's compelling your readers to keep reading is to see how they work hard to get where they are going. If you work super hard the whole time, I'm going to give an example here. You guys probably won't know because it's a TV series that most people don't watch, but there's a reason they don't watch it because it sucked. It was a good concept, but it was badly executed. Um, there was the last season, and in the last season, this guy sacrifices his life in order to try and save the town. And I was like, this is dope as heck. And then all of a sudden they're like, I'm like, he was my favorite character, and he died, and you're just gonna say it did not matter. What? I was very mad. So you're gonna end up with some pretty pissed off readers if you do stuff like that, where they like try so hard and are doing amazing, and then all of a sudden the plot twist is all their work means nothing, and it's like, excuse me. That's your readers tend to get really heated about that because they get really, like I said, really attached. They really are like, you go, guy. I don't want you to die, but at the same time, I want the town to be saved. So I admire your bravery. And then they die, and you're like, I'm so glad you saved the town. And that's what's supposed to happen, right? Now, how does the plot twist work when they do fail? You have to have, once again, that proper foreshadowing that suggests they're going to fail. There was no foreshadowing to the contrary here. It was all saying it was going to work. 100% of all information was saying it was going to work. If they had given me even like 4 or 5 hints saying, hey, this is probably not going to work, you shouldn't do this, or hey, I've heard that this isn't going to work, I should go stop him, I would have been like, oh no, and it would have been tragic. But instead, I was just angry because there was no foreshadowing to the contrary. It was just, guess what? It didn't work now. Be sad. And I was just upset. So oftentimes Deus Ex Machina is the opposite, though, where the twist solves all of their problems. Where they've been working super hard, they've been super dedicated, they've been doing amazing, and then all of a sudden they're like, during this specific time or at this specific day, this is going to fix everything. It's like, okay, why didn't someone think of that before? Why haven't we done this before? Why is it that the evil king can only be taken down now? This is part of what Avatar The Last Airbender does well. Thinking of the Day of the Black Sun, where basically all firebenders lose their powers. And if he had won during that day, we would have all kind of been like, eh. Like, that's okay, I guess. But because he didn't win and because Ozai thought ahead and got out, we're all like, oh no! Like, that was a cool plot twist instead of just being like, yay. Kind of you know? So that's what you need to worry about with Deus Ex Machina. You also need to worry about, like I said, things just coming out of left field that fix everything. I haven't even read this book, but I've heard horror stories about it from other editors, where a lot of editors have passed around this book purely because it's so bad. I haven't gotten the title yet. I need to ask someone who references it again and be like, "What's the title?" just so I can understand the reference. But basically, the whole romance story is that she goes to this other land and she falls in love with this fantasy guy, classic, and everything's going well. And then all of a sudden they're all like, oh no, we're gonna die because the evil king is trying to come kill us. And then it's like, psych, she's the princess, so we're all good now. And it's like, what? Why? How? Wait? What is happening? So, it doesn't matter if it solves all the problems. If your problem is not solvable without throwing in some insane plot twist that makes no sense, you probably need to rethink your plot. Because generally it should be solvable with the character's own initiative and the character's own thought process. Even if it takes an outside force, they need to still work really hard to get there. And so as a result, that's why you need to be careful of Deus Ex Machina is because it loses all that effort and it loses all that power behind your character empowering themselves. Any other questions about plot twists or how to do them well, or did I do a pretty good job? Cool. All right, then I'm going to turn off the video. As per usual, I'm just going to remind you guys that we have a contest currently going on for the spring fantasy contest. The contest is basically write a short story slash myth that either takes place during spring or involves springtime. So it can even be like how this specific mythical creature in your world was created, or how this specific god holiday was created, or whatever. As long as it takes place during spring, that's the main caveat. I do want your own original work. And when I say that, I mean, am I gonna like super diligently check everywhere to figure out which myth you're using from some obscure place? No. But at the same time, I am going to do a quick research just to make sure that you aren't just retelling something previous. I don't want this to be a retelling. I want this to be your own unique thing. Your own thing that you made up. Even if it is in this world, you could make up how gravity exists because there's secretly a fantasy explanation that scientists just don't understand yet. I don't know. Like, it's up to you. The next contest that is coming up after that, because that one ends in May, is going to be the summer reading contest, and summer writing slash reading contest because it's part of the summer reading program. And that one is going to be writing a short story about unearthing bones. It can be any genre, it can be any plot that are unearthed and are a critical part of the plot at some point during the story. With that being said, I'm going to turn the video off and you are free to do whatever you wish to do.